Hey everyone, it's EverythingeeB here. In today's video, I am going to be talking about my experience using the iPhone 5 as my main phone for an entire week. And yes, I did actually do that. The iPhone 5 was released in 2012 and was the last iPhone that Steve Jobs would personally have input on, making it quite unique and personally my favorite. So I figured for a nice throwback, I would put my SIM card inside the phone and try to see if I could live with it for a week. Here is my experience. But before that, here's some context. I bought this phone back in 2019, and back then, it was the first iPhone that I had ever bought, aside from another iPhone 4 I used for a week back then. I absolutely loved the phone. However, it had a really awful battery capacity, and a weird bumpy texture ended up forming on the home button. I continued to use the phone. However, it got so bad to the point where I had to carry a battery bank around just to use it, and it was also quite slow. When I got my 6S, I was shocked at how much faster it was than my iPhone 5, and I never thought about going back. But recently, I decided to actually try it, to use it for a week, and I really didn't regret it. But the phone was really not in a state to be daily driven, since the battery capacity was at an eye-wateringly low 21%, and it was also locked to Bell, and I'm on Rogers. This also explains how I was able to do this challenge in the first place, since in the United States I wouldn't have been able to do it. So I decided to buy a new battery and home button, and replace them both. The replacement went smooth, so I wiped the phone, and when I put my SIM in, it just worked. It wasn't locked anymore, meaning that the challenge was on. So now that I'm done with that backstory, it's time to move on to the actual experience itself. And the experience was quite awesome in some areas and not so good in others. I guess the way you could describe the experience is how Josh from 91 Tech described daily driving the iPhone 4S back in 2018, which is that it's kind of like driving a slow car. The phone was pretty decent for anything not relating to connecting it to the internet. As soon as you try to get stuff done relating to the internet, it would slow down to a crawl. Mind you, it wasn't as bad as some older iOS devices such as the 4S or the iPad 2, but it was still pretty slow. And that brings me to the first part of the review, the software. The phone obviously ran iOS 10, which feels quite outdated compared to the iOS 16 beta I'm daily driving on my iPhone, mostly because of the lack of widgets, focuses, dark mode, etc. Still, it wasn't too bad to use. What was kind of bad to use though was the apps. For a phone, or at least a smartphone, that I'm dailying, I need the phone to have Apple Music, YouTube, Discord, maybe Reddit, it depends, an app for prayer times, the Fire TV app, and WhatsApp. Thankfully, this phone had all except for WhatsApp, but that was okay because I could just link my WhatsApp account to my computer and send messages from there. The YouTube app actually didn't work straight off the bat, and required me to either update or quit. This is a frankly stupid measure put in place by Google to get people to upgrade their old phones to the latest and greatest, and I wasn't having any of it with this challenge. After jailbreaking my iPhone and installing Filza, I was able to edit the app version and use YouTube as normal. Everything else basically just worked, though quite slowly. Discord was the worst example of this, where it would lag just a type since it kept forcing its stupid stickers on me. Reddit was fine, though it was a bit rough around the edges, and every other app worked fine. I tried a couple of games too, which also both worked. So now that we have that out of the way, let's talk about the hardware. The phone is quite compact, with a tiny 4-inch screen. I don't need to tell you that the screen on this phone is quite small. In a world of gigantic 6+ inch phones, this one really stands out for being small. It also is very light, coming in at just 4 ounces or 112 grams. For context, the iPhone 13 Pro Max is more than double that at 8.5 ounces or 240 grams. The phone mainly consists of aluminum on the back with small strips of glass for wireless connectivity. It also has a very square build with round volume buttons compared to flat ones on the latest iPhones, and the power button on the top instead on the side like it has been since the iPhone 6. And on the bottom, we have 2 obsolete pieces of I/O, the headphone jack and the lightning port. The lightning port maybe not as much, but headphone jacks are barely seen on phones these days. Thank Apple for that. Even though I had a headphone jack, I still actually used wireless headphones while using the phone. The battery on the phone was actually really good. I was seriously surprised. I know I did replace the battery right before starting the challenge, but even then, it was still able to get me throughout the entire day and then some on a single charge. This isn't that bad for a phone from 2012. Keep in mind, it's running the latest version of iOS that's supported on it, so it's likely using a lot of its available CPU. But even then, it was able to keep up for the entire day. Storage was also not really a big issue. Despite the fact that it had 16 gigabytes, it was fine to download all the apps that I wanted to use. Now let's talk about the camera. This was quite a mixed bag for me. On one hand, I thought the camera was pretty alright, but putting it next to my daily driver, that being my iPhone XS, it really starts to fall behind. Outside in broad daylight, the camera is actually quite nice, and you definitely wouldn't be able to notice that I was taking photos on a 10-year-old phone, unless you just so happen to be some professional photographer or something. It's just when you got indoors under poor lighting conditions that the camera really starts to show its age. I took a few pictures to demonstrate exactly what I'm talking about. Video on this phone is also mostly okay-ish. It can do 1080p at 30 frames a second. However, there's no OIS, making video feel quite jittery. But one of the worst aspects about the phone is the performance. It's not really that great in hindsight. It definitely was better than iOS 9 on the 4S, as that's a whole nother demon. However, when I say that, it doesn't mean that it's hugely amazing on iOS 10 either. The phone feels quite jittery at times, frequently dropping below the 60 FPS that iPhones are known for running at, and apps still take quite long to open. YouTube is one of the more extreme examples. It sometimes takes over 15 seconds just to load into the feed. Now, you could say that I'm kind of spoiled by my iPhone XS with it loading everything that I want in just a few seconds. However, even the iPhone 6S isn't that slow, and it runs an iOS version that came out 6 years after its release, compared to just 4 on the 5. This really does show how far technology has come, but it was still annoying when I was using it. A lot of times I would end up accidentally declining calls because of how slow the phone was to pop up with the call. And that brings me to the final part of my review, if you could call it that, which is the experience. Personally, I think that the experience with it was okay at best. The phone was pretty alright for making calls, writing text messages, unless they were texts on Discord, and checking my email. However, outside of that, it really starts to show its age. I did enjoy using it for the first few days. However, after that, it kind of became a pain to use, especially because it couldn't even handle Apple Music that well. Should you try using the iPhone 5 in 2022? Well, I'm not even sure if that's possible. The rapid shutdown 2G and 3G in other first world countries, the United States being the prime example, would make it much harder to actually use it as your daily. For me, I got lucky because I live in Canada and I'm on Rogers, who still maintain their decades-old 2G network. But depending on where you live, you might not be as lucky. But if you want to try living with one for just another week, I open this challenge up for you to try. Take out your SIM from your smartphone, put in an older phone for this week. If you do happen to try this, you can join my Discord to talk about it. Link is in the description. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you didn't, don't even think about pushing that subscribe button. I'll see you all next time.